Chapter 1. The fortress in the frozen snow before the very eyes of the entire London ton, Clara's betrothed held the hand of her sister. He publicly declared the dissolution of their engagement to wed the sister with the massive dowry, rendering Clara the laughingstock of all Mayfair. Not content with this betrayal, her rapacious cousin, Viscount Harlow, swiftly seized the modest townhouse of Clara and her father to settle their debts, and even secretly drew up a contract to sell her as a concubine to an elderly, brutal wool merchant, Kenneth Thorne. To preserve her life and her honor, Clara had but a single recourse: to flee under the cover of a tempestuous night and accept a position as a governess at the remote Blackwood Manor in the north. Clara recalled the humiliation in the drawing rooms of London, where ladies hid their sneers behind painted silk fans, and gentlemen whispered cruel jests. The memory of her cousin's study, thick with the smell of old tobacco and ink, where he had signed the documents that stripped her of her birthright, still burned in her mind. She remembered the cold rain falling on the cobblestones of Mayfair as she left the townhouse for the last time. Her cousin, Viscount Harlow, had stood by the window with a triumphant smirk, holding the deed to the property. He had told her that a woman without a dowry was nothing but a burden, and that she should be grateful for the match he had made with Kenneth Thorne. The wool merchant was a man of 50, with bloodshot eyes, and a reputation for cruelty that made even the hardiest servants tremble. Clara had known then that she had to run, even if it meant facing the freezing wilderness of the north. She had slipped out of the back door in the dead of night, her feet splashing in the cold puddles, with only a small wooden trunk containing her dearest memories. A winter blizzard enveloped the wild and perilous moors of Yorkshire. Bone-chilling northern winds howled incessantly, sweeping down countless heavy flakes of snow that blanketed the endless rolling hills and the barren ancient oak forests in pure white. The evening sky was gray and dark, resembling a vast shroud draped over the land. Amidst this frozen, desolate, and menacing landscape, Blackwood Manor loomed like an ancient stone fortress. Its dark gray walls, covered with centuries of moss and clinging snow, along with its pointed turrets piercing the gray sky, created a somber, solemn, and lonely atmosphere. Blackwood Manor was the principal seat of the Duke of Blackwood, a house of ancient lineage and immense power, yet it now appeared completely isolated amidst the wild snowstorms of the north. The grand structure seemed to frown upon the desolate valley, its dark stones absorbing the dim light of the dying day. Clara Harlow pulled her worn ash-gray wool coat tighter around herself as the ramshackle mail coach ground to a halt before the great stone gates of the estate. Her slender frame trembled, not only from the bone-chilling English winter cold seeping through her thin leather shoes to numb her feet, but also from the sheer dread of the uncertain future before her. The crunching of the wheels on the frozen ground echoed lonely across the snowy valley. The curmudgeonly old coachman dared stop only a few yards from the gates, hastily tossed her small wooden trunk onto the snow, and hurried away as though Blackwood Manor were a cursed domain. The cold wind bit at her cheeks, and the silence of the moors pressed against her ears like a heavy weight. Clara stood alone in the white expanse of snow. She bent to retrieve the small wooden chest, her sole remaining possession. Within lay only a few simple gowns, some old scholarly books belonging to her late father, and a small set of paints. Her father, a gentle and erudite man, had spent his life studying ancient historical texts. Yet after his sudden demise from a grave illness, leaving behind a mountain of debt from publishing his unsuccessful scholarly works, her family was plunged into complete bankruptcy. It was then that disaster struck, as her betrothed betrayed her, and her cousins stripped her of everything. This was a place that any lady of the capital would resolutely refuse, given the cold, terrifying reputation and the dark rumors surrounding its master. Clara knew that returning to London meant facing Kenneth Thorne, a fate far worse than any northern storm. When the grand oak doors of the castle swung open, she was greeted not by the warmth of a hearth, but by the cold, haughty countenance of Lady Beatrice Sinclair, the aunt of the Duke. Lady Beatrice wore an expensive yet outdated gown of dark olive-green satin, her heavily powdered face marked with deep lines around her eyes and mouth that betrayed her tyranny. She stood in the cold marble hall, raising a golden monocle to inspect Clara from head to toe, as if appraising a cheap piece of merchandise. The light from the massive crystal chandelier overhead cast a pale, cold glow, reflecting off the lifeless marble statues lining the corridor. The scent of damp stone and stale lavender filled the air, mixed with the faint warmth of a distant fire. "So you are the wretched creature sent from the agency in London," Beatrice said, her voice thin, sharp and laden with disdain. "The orphaned daughter of a destitute scholar, remember your place in this house. You are merely a low governess, hired to care for a silent child, who is deemed a shameful disgrace to this family. Do not dare to dream of anything beyond your station, and never venture into the main quarters unless summoned. The House of Sinclair does not tolerate social climbers." Clara curtsied in accordance with proper etiquette, yet her spine remained straight, her deep blue eyes reflecting a quiet resolve, free from fear or discouragement before the woman's patronizing demeanor. She met the older woman's gaze with a calm dignity that seemed to irritate Beatrice. "I understand my duties, my lady. I have come to tutor and care for the young Master Leo Sinclair, and for no other purpose. I trust my knowledge and devotion will aid the young master in his recovery." The reality at Blackwood Manor was far worse than anything Clara could have imagined from the gossip in London. The young Leo, the sole heir to the dukedom of Blackwood, was only 5 years of age. Following a catastrophic carriage accident 2 years prior that claimed the life of his mother and left his father severely wounded, Leo had fallen completely silent. The boy suffered from selective mutism, refusing to speak and fearing all around him. Lady Beatrice and her son, Lord Thomas, had taken advantage of Duke Arthur's prolonged absence on the European battlefields to seize control of the estate. Recognizing that Leo was the only obstacle preventing Thomas from inheriting the title under the law of entail, Beatrice had secretly put a cruel plan into motion. She confined Leo to a cold attic room in the corner tower, ordering the servants to starve him, depriving him of sunlight and human contact, and filling his mind with terrifying tales of monsters to drive him to madness, thereby stripping him of his rightful inheritance. The boy was kept isolated, far from the warmth of the lower floors, where his cries could not be heard. When Clara was led to the dark, damp, and cold attic by a maid whose eyes showed pity, she saw Leo cowering in a dark corner beneath the bed. The room was empty, containing only a worn iron bedstead and a small wooden table with a broken leg. There was no hearth, nor any warm blankets. Leo was gaunt, his cheeks sunken, his large black eyes filled with terror and vigilance. He wore only a thin shirt, his small body trembling violently as the cold seeping through the cracks in the stone walls. Clara's heart clenched with pain and fury at the cruelty of his relatives. She immediately noticed the dark red bruises on the boy's small arms, the marks of physical abuse inflicted by Lady Beatrice and Thomas. The chamber smelled of dust and neglect, and the wind rattled the single loose pane of the window. Clara did not rush to approach the boy with hollow words of comfort or sudden movements. She understood that to a deeply wounded child, any abrupt gesture was a threat. She gently sat upon the cold wooden floor at a safe distance from the bed, keeping her posture low to avoid placing pressure on the child. From her small traveling bag, she drew some sheets of drawing paper and colored pencils she had brought from London. Under the dim light of a beeswax candle, she began to draw charming pictures of a little falcon spreading its wings to fly freely in the blue sky. At the same time, she moved her fingers slowly, forming simple sign language symbols representing hello, friend, and safe, which she had learned when helping her father support deaf and mute children in their old parish. Her movements were deliberate and calm, designed to show that she posed no danger. Leo watched Clara's finger movements intently through the gap beneath the bed. The fear in the boy's eyes was gradually replaced by curiosity and wonder. After more than an hour of absolute silence, Leo nudged himself out from under the bed, his gaze never leaving her fingers. The boy timidly raised his small thin hand, attempting to replicate Clara's sign for friend. Clara's eyes welled with emotion, yet she smiled gently, extending her hand to welcome the boy's trembling fingers. In that cold attic of Blackwood Manor, an invisible yet unbreakable bond was formed between the destitute governess and the abandoned young master. The silence between them was no longer a barrier, but a bridge. Chapter 2. The welcoming ball. 3 weeks elapsed since Clara's arrival at Blackwood Manor. Under her devoted, patient, and discreet care, Leo's condition showed marked improvement. The boy consented to leave the attic room, took his meals regularly, and frequently communicated with her through sign language. Nevertheless, Leo's gradual recovery was a thorn in the side of Lady Beatrice. She perceived that her control over the estate was gravely threatened as the return of Duke Arthur drew nearer by the day. On that day, Blackwood Manor grew unusually bustling. Splendid carriages bearing the crests of noble houses rolled into the estate courtyard. Lady Beatrice had organized a grand welcoming ball to celebrate the return of Duke Arthur Sinclair from the European battlefields. In truth, this was her opportunity to publicly demonstrate to the Yorkshire gentry and the London ton that Leo was a mad child, unfit to inherit, and to put forward her son Lord Thomas as the next rightful heir. The grand ballroom, long closed to the world, was thrown open, and the scent of expensive beeswax candles mingled with the perfume of the ladies. The great hall of Blackwood Manor was decorated with utmost splendor, under the light of hundreds of fine beeswax candles. Melodious dance music drifted from a quintet, mingling with the artificial laughter and the rustle of expensive silk gowns worn by the elite. Clara was directed to bring Leo down to the hall to meet the guests. She dressed the boy in his finest noble attire and held his hand to instill confidence. Leo clung to Clara, his small frame trembling slightly as he faced the noisy crowd and the prying eyes. She could feel the rapid beating of his pulse against her palm, and she squeezed his hand gently to reassure him. As they descended the grand staircase leading into the ballroom, Lady Beatrice stood waiting with Lord Thomas and a group of influential peers. Thomas, a man with a bloated face from excessive drinking and cunning, narrow eyes, sneered maliciously. He deliberately cast a half-burnt bronze candlestick toward Leo to trigger the boy's terror before the assembled guests. "Behold, the heir of Blackwood is a cowardly madman," Thomas laughed aloud, pointing at the boy. The crowd fell silent, watching the heavy metal object fly through the air. Clara immediately threw herself forward, shielding Leo entirely from the falling candlestick with her slender back. The hot brass grazed her arm, leaving a large, angry red burn on the fair skin of her right arm. She bit her lip to suppress a cry of pain, swiftly pulling Leo into her arms to soothe the frightened child. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her gaze fixed on her tormentors, refusing to show weakness. Lady Beatrice instantly stepped forward, her face contorted with malice and triumph. She raised a sparkling diamond necklace before the assembly. Caught in the act, this wretched governess has stolen the heirloom diamond necklace of the Sinclair family from my chambers. Not only is she a thief, but she has also repeatedly abused the young Master Leo physically to force his silence. Look upon the bruises on Leo's arms. She alone is responsible, Beatrice shrieked, her voice echoing through the hall, causing the music to cease and the surrounding nobility to murmur in excitement. "Vile thief, kneel and confess your crimes, and begone from this estate at once before I summon the constables to throw you into prison," Thomas added, reaching out to grasp Clara's shoulder to force her onto the marble floor. Clara stood erect, shielding Leo behind her, her eyes shone bright as winter stars, devoid of any weak tears. She raised her head high, looking directly at Beatrice and the onlookers. "I am no thief, and I have never harmed Leo. You placed that necklace into my apron pocket yourself while I cleared the study this morning. And the bruises on Leo's arms were inflicted by your own pinches to frame me. You wish to ruin this child's life to usurp his inheritance." Clara's voice was firm and clear, resounding through the silent room. Her hands were steady, and her posture was as unyielding as the stone walls around them. "Silence, you deceitful wench," Thomas roared, raising his hand to strike Clara. "Hold your hand." A low, ice-cold voice resounded from the entrance, carrying an overwhelming authority that sent a shiver down every spine. The crowd parted instantly in awe. Arthur Sinclair, Duke of Blackwood, had returned. He wore the dark blue uniform of the Royal Cavalry, his chest adorned with glittering medals of valor. He was tall, broad-shouldered, carrying the cold, ruthless aura of a warrior newly returned from the jaws of death. His face was rugged and masculine, marked by a long scar running from his left jaw down to his neck, the remnant of a battlefield blade. His deep ash-gray eyes, sharp as a blade, swept across the chamber. A chilling silence descended upon the hall. The ladies nearby ceased their gossip, and the gentlemen held their wine-glasses suspended in mid-air. Arthur's presence was like a sudden frost, freezing all movement. The murmuring crowd parted like a retreating tide, none daring to meet his fierce, searching gaze. The rumors of his ferocity on the battlefields of Flanders were well known, and the sight of him in the flesh was enough to strike terror into the heart of any lord or lady who had gossiped behind his back. He stood at the threshold for a long moment, his broad chest rising and falling with his steady breaths, before he began his slow, commanding march into the room. Arthur took measured steps toward Clara, his guards and retainers followed, standing in two disciplined ranks. He had stood by the entrance and witnessed the entire scene. Lady Beatrice rushed forward, feigning alarm. "Arthur, you have returned, thank heavens. This thieving governess is abusing Leo and stealing the family property." Arthur did not look at Beatrice. He stopped before Clara. His ash-gray eyes stared at the angry red burn on her arm. then looked down at Leo, who clung tightly to her skirt. Leo, a child who had feared everyone, now looked at his father, raised his hands, and used the signs Clara had taught him. Mother safe, protect. Arthur's eyes wavered. He realized that his silent son did not fear this governess, but rather regarded her as his sole refuge. He observed Clara's pride. She did not weep or beg like a guilty soul, but stood tall to shield his son. A silent, intense understanding passed between them in that moment, a quiet spark of connection amidst the hostile crowd. Without a word, Arthur unclasped the thick, warm, dark blue military cloak from his shoulders. He stepped forward, gently yet decisively draping the large cloak over Clara's shivering shoulders, concealing her injury from the curious eyes of the nobility. The wool was heavy and carried the scent of rain and gunpowder, wrapping her in a sudden, protective warmth. Then he bent down and gently lifted Leo into his arms. He turned to look at Beatrice and her son, his ash-gray eyes flashing with bone-chilling ruthlessness. Blackwood does not welcome cowards who bully a child and a woman. Benson, from this day forth, Lady Beatrice and Lord Thomas shall have no authority over the ledgers or internal affairs of this estate, and they are strictly forbidden from entering Leo's bedchamber or study. They may remain in this residence under close supervision, but their authority is officially at an end. Arthur, you cannot treat me thus. I am your aunt, Beatrice shrieked in shock and humiliation. I can, Arthur said, his voice low but carrying absolute authority. And I have just done so. The guards immediately stepped forward, escorting Beatrice and Thomas from the hall before the stunned Yorkshire gentry. Their sudden fall from power, and the Duke's formidable public defense of the poor governess, officially marked the beginning of a series of dramatic changes at Blackwood Manor. Chapter 3. The Covenant of Pride. The following morning, as the faint winter sun finally pierced the grey clouds of Yorkshire, Clara was invited by the butler, Benson, to the Duke's private study. The room, situated in the private west wing of the second floor, was adorned with polished dark oak. Stern portraits of Sinclair ancestors, knights, earls, and former dukes lined the walls, their eyes gazing down upon guests with cold, proud judgment. A massive mahogany writing desk piled with geological maps of the estate's limestone and coal mines, alongside legal testaments, stood before a great sans fireplace where pine logs crackled, emitting a rich warmth. Arthur Sinclair stood by the large arched window, overlooking the snow-covered estate, holding a cup of hot, unsweetened black tea. He had discarded his heavy cavalry uniform, dressing instead in a simple white silk shirt with a high collar, a dark blue velvet waistcoat framing his broad shoulders and dark trousers. The long scar on his left jaw down to his neck appeared even more pronounced in the daylight, imparting a stern, formidable, and aloof appearance. When Clara entered, she did not speak first, maintaining her quiet pride. Arthur did not turn immediately, merely gesturing for her to sit upon the green leather chair opposite the writing desk. The silence in the room was dense, charged with the unspoken tension of their sudden alliance. Has your arm been dressed and treated by the estate physician, Miss Harlow? Arthur spoke, his voice low, gravelly, and devoid of much emotion, yet lacking the threatening coldness of the night before. Thank you for your concern, Your Grace. The burn has been treated with soothing ointment and bound carefully. It is not severe and will not affect my ability to fulfill my duties, Clara replied softly, sitting with the perfect posture of a strictly educated lady, her hands resting lightly on her lap. Arthur turned, placing his teacup on the windowsill, and walked slowly toward the desk. He pushed a document bound in fine sheepskin toward her. On the cover, the red wax seal bearing the falcon crest of Blackwood, spreading its wings over a coronet, was prominent. I wish you to sign this document. This is a marriage settlement, an agreement of marriage. Clara raised her brow, her deep blue eyes meeting the Duke's ash-gray gaze without showing alarm, confusion, or joy at the sudden proposal. An agreement of marriage? You are a powerful and wealthy Duke of the North, while I am merely the orphan daughter of a poor scholar, currently accused of theft by your own aunt. Why do you make such an offer to me? Arthur sat in the chair opposite her, clasping his hands upon the mahogany desk. His sharp ash-gray eyes observed her intently, assessing the remarkable composure of the young woman. For the sake of my son Leo, throughout the past 2 years, since the carriage accident that claimed his mother and left me severely wounded in Flanders, the boy has refused to let anyone touch him or communicate in any manner. You are the sole person he trusts and signs to. Lady Beatrice and her son, Thomas, will not abandon their plot to claim the inheritance of Blackwood. The Sinclair family entail dictates that the estates, coal mines, and the entire 80,000 acres of land, shall transfer to Thomas should Leo be proven incompetent or insane before my passing. This entailment is a strict legal covenant established by my grandfather, locking the wealth of the family to the male heir. Lady Beatrice knows this, and she intends to exploit it to the fullest. If they succeed in branding Leo as insane, Lord Thomas will inherit the title, the manor, and the vast coal mines that fuel our family fortune, leaving Leo penniless and at their mercy. At present, Beatrice is secretly lobbying influential figures in London, bribing physicians and the parish vicar to secure a certificate of insanity to present to the Court of Wards. I require a wife, a rightful duchess, to stand with me in protecting Leo, managing the estate, and facing the London Ton during the upcoming season to prove the boy is of sound mind. I need someone of your intellect and fortitude. He paused, his voice deepening with cold pragmatism. Furthermore, I have secretly investigated your family. Your uncle, Viscount Harlow, has conspired with my political adversaries in the London Parliament to slander my name and undermine the cavalry. Marrying you will allow me to legally shield you from his control, void the contract selling you to the merchant Kenneth Thorne, and make your presence a shield against their maneuvers. This is a fair transaction beneficial to both. You protect Leo and assist in managing Blackwood, and I provide you with the title of Duchess of Blackwood, the absolute protection of the Sinclair family, and an allowance of £10,000 per annum. This pin money will be yours to use as you see fit. After 2 years, should you wish to depart, I shall grant an honorable separation and settle a small estate in the south upon you to live independently for the rest of your days. Clara stared at the settlement. She understood her plight. Without this title and the Duke's protection, her covetous uncle would soon discover her and force her into that brutal marriage. Yet she refused to be a passive pawn in the Duke's power play. She raised her head, her gaze proud and decisive. I agree to sign this settlement, my lord, but on 3 conditions. A flicker of surprise and amusement passed through Arthur's ash-gray eyes. He nodded slightly. Name them first. I must have complete control over the domestic ledgers of Blackwood Manor and manage the charities of the Sinclair family in Yorkshire. I refuse to be a mere figurehead duchess sitting in the drawing room as an ornament. I wish to restructure the relief funds, providing flour, firewood, and warm blankets to the tenant families in the valley during this cold winter. Second, the education, care, and health of Leo must be entirely under my authority, and no one shall interfere, including yourself, should it distress the child. I shall establish an official schoolroom in the east wing of the castle and invite the vicar, Charles Bradley, to witness his progress to silence Beatrice's groundless rumors. Third, this marriage shall be real in the eyes of the law and society, but in our private lives, we shall respect each other's personal space. We shall occupy separate suites of rooms until the agreement expires. We are partners in this transaction and nothing more. Arthur looked at the slender yet iron-willed young woman before him. Her self-respect, sharp intellect, and practical capability commanded his quiet, deep respect. Without a word, he took up a quill, wrote her 3 additional clauses directly into the marriage settlement, and signed his name Arthur Sinclair. He pushed the quill toward her. Clara took it, her fingers gripping the dark shaft, and signed her name below, Clara Harlow. Under the bright morning sun streaming through the study window, the covenant of pride was established, binding the lives of 2 lonely souls to a tempestuous journey ahead. Chapter 4. The silent dinner following the signing of the marriage settlement, Clara officially relocated from the cramped attic governess room to the Duchess's private suite in the central wing of Blackwood Manor. The chambers were exceedingly vast and sumptuous, adorned with exquisite hand-woven aubusson carpets, grand gold-leaf mirrors carved with trailing roses, and a massive bed draped in warm cream silk. Heavy burgundy velvet curtains, hanging beside the large leaded windows, blocked the freezing winds blowing in from the moors. Yet this opulence and warmth could not entirely dispel the cold, desolate, and melancholy air enveloping the ancient residence. To Clara, this place resembled a gilded cage rather than a home. The spacious rooms echoed with her quiet footsteps, a reminder of her isolation in this stone fortress. Though Lady Beatrice and Lord Thomas had been stripped of all authority, they remained in the annex wing, seeking every means to exert their influence. The older servants, influenced by them, quietly maintained a suspicious, distant, and disrespectful attitude toward Clara. They whispered behind her back in the dark corridors, deeming her a low opportunist who used wiles to seduce the Duke and change her fortune. That afternoon, Clara met with Mrs. Gable, the stern housekeeper, who presented the household accounts with a haughty air, deliberately scrambling the figures and omitting various items to test the new Duchess. Clara did not lose her temper. She sat at her desk for 3 hours, systematically reorganizing the numbers, cross-referencing the kitchen expenses with the pantry inventory, and uncovering numerous absurd deficits. The ledgers were covered in grease stains and messy ink blots, a deliberate attempt to hide the theft of sugar, tea, and expensive spices. Clara methodically noted every discrepancy, calculating the exact amount that had been stolen over the past 6 months. When she summoned Mrs. Gable back, Clara pointed out every discrepancy in a calm yet firm tone, and coldly warned that any future error would result in her immediate dismissal, without a character reference. In the strict social hierarchy of the North, a servant dismissed without a character reference would face complete ruin, unable to find employment in any respectable house. Mrs. Gable's face turned pale and she retreated in silent defeat. The butler, Benson, who witnessed the entire encounter from the hallway, looked upon Clara with genuine respect, realizing she was no simple girl to be trifled with. Their first dinner as husband and wife took place in the great dining hall of the castle. The vast chamber, with its high ceiling paneled in dark oak, featured a massive sandstone fireplace emitting a faint warmth. A table 10 meters in length was covered in a pristine white linen cloth, laid with silver candelabra and fine porcelain tableware bearing the falcon crest. Arthur sat at one head of the table, while Clara sat at the opposite end, 10 meters away. The immense space between them was filled only by the flickering candlelight and the absolute silence of the servants standing along the walls like stone statues. The distance felt like an ocean, cold and impassable. The clatter of cutlery against porcelain echoed dry and monotonous. Arthur dined in silence, disciplined and strict like a soldier on the battlefield. He did not initiate conversation nor glance in her direction. Clara maintained her composure, slowly enjoying her hot asparagus soup, roasted pheasant with wild berries, and vegetables, showing no discomfort under the suffocating silence. She understood that Arthur Sinclair was a man bearing deep scars of the past. He did not believe in love and despised vacuous social pleasantries. In his heart, Arthur reflected on old battles and wondered if the proud, serene woman before him would indeed prove a sturdy shield for his son. Meanwhile, Clara thought of her father's peaceful study in London, reminding herself that she had endured far worse trials, and she would survive this castle. The dinner proceeded for a full hour, without a single word spoken. The 10-meter divide of the long table was a testament to their differences in class, their mutual suspicion, and their personal boundaries. Yet through the glowing candlelight, Arthur's ash-gray eyes occasionally drifted toward Clara. He observed how she kept her back straight, despite her weariness, how she gently gestured her thanks to the servants when they poured her water, and how she maintained the supreme dignity of a duchess, despite wearing no expensive jewels. That silent dinner was not merely quiet. It was a silent battle of wits between two proud characters, learning to accustom themselves to each other's presence. Every slight movement of a fork, every quiet breath, seemed to carry a weight of unspoken questions. Chapter 5. The Warm Hand. A few days later, Blackwood Manor welcomed a special guest from London. It was the young solicitor, Lord Henry Churchill, the family lawyer responsible for reviewing the financial ledgers and the testamentary clauses of the House of Sinclair. Henry was an elegant gentleman with light brown hair, dressed in a fashionable coat, and possessed warm, smiling eyes, a stark contrast to Arthur's cold, solemn, and formidable demeanor. Clara met Henry in the castle's ancient library to hand over the financial records of the estate she had reviewed and optimized. Thanks to her excellent numeracy taught by her father, Clara had swiftly uncovered large deficits embezzled by Lady Beatrice over the past 2 years, drafting a highly effective plan to reduce operating costs. They sat close together at the study table, discussing the figures enthusiastically and sharing stories of scientific works and mathematical puzzles they both favored in London. This was the first time since arriving in Yorkshire that Clara enjoyed an open, intellectual, and comfortable conversation, her clear laughter echoing softly in the quiet library. It was a brief escape from the heavy atmosphere of the manor. They spoke of the libraries in Mayfair, the new books published by the Royal Society, and the quiet gardens where she used to read. Henry listened with rapt attention, his eyes bright with interest, as he followed her explanations of the complex estate accounts. For a moment, Clara forgot the dark stone walls of Blackwood and the silent, cold dinners, feeling a warm sense of companionship that she had sorely missed since her father's death. Henry looked upon Clara's neatly presented and scientific ledger with open admiration. My Lady Duchess, I have worked with many noble families in London, yet I have never seen a lady with such financial acumen and intellect. This plan will save the estate over £4,000 a year by identifying the fraudulent invoices for the stables and timber under Beatrice. Arthur is indeed the most fortunate man in England to have wed you. Henry smiled, his eyes reflecting sincere admiration. Clara offered a faint smile, a rare warm smile on her face since arriving in Yorkshire. She bent down to point out a crucial line of figures to Henry on the parchment. The distance between them inadvertently narrowed under the afternoon sunlight streaming through the library window. Arthur Sinclair entered the library at that precise moment. Beholding Clara laughing and talking merrily beside the young lawyer in the warm afternoon light, their heads close over the study table, Arthur's chest suddenly tightened with a sharp pang of discomfort. A vague wave of jealousy and anger rose within the Duke. He strode into the room, the heavy tread of his riding boots on the wooden floor, shattering the warm ambiance of the library. "Churchill, have you finished reviewing the documents?" Arthur spoke, his voice dropping to a low, menacing register, his gaze pinned to Henry as if to burn him. He stood tall, his broad shoulders blocking the light. Henry Churchill felt the oppressive chill radiating from the Duke, quickly standing erect and bowing. "Your Grace, it is complete. The Duchess has performed an extraordinary task. This financial report is marvelously perfect. Very well, the guards will escort you to the guest chambers. I have urgent matters to discuss with my wife," Arthur commanded decisively, his cold tone leaving no room for Henry to speak further. Once Henry departed, the vast library fell silent, leaving only the two of them under the fading twilight. The tension in the room was palpable, crackling like dry wood. Clara stacked the documents, not looking at Arthur as she spoke softly. "If you wish to inspect the accounts, why did you not apply the ointment to your burn this afternoon?" Arthur interrupted her suddenly. He walked close to the desk, his eyes fixed on her right hand, which trembled slightly with pain as she held the parchment folder. The burn from the welcoming ball had not fully healed, and her constant work with the ledgers had irritated it, leaving the skin red. "It is nothing, I can bear it myself," Clara replied, attempting to hide her hand behind the folds of her coat. Arthur said no more. He walked to the small medicine chest in the corner of the library, retrieving a porcelain jar of pale green ointment and a roll of clean linen bandage. He returned, taking Clara by the wrist and pulling her gently to sit upon the leather sofa by the hearth. His action was firm yet not rough. Arthur's large, rough hand, calloused from years of holding a sword, clasped her slender fingers. Clara instinctively pulled back, but he gently squeezed her wrist, holding it fast. "Do not move," he commanded in a low, warm voice, his eyes looking down at the burn on her skin. Arthur used his finger to apply some of the cool ointment, gently spreading it over the red burn on the back of her hand. The cavalry duke's touch was exceedingly careful and gentle, as if he were handling the most fragile crystal in the world. The warmth from his hand seeped into her skin, soothing the stinging pain of the burn. Clara stared at the crown of his head, watching the long scar on his jaw twitch slightly as he focused on binding the wound. Her breath caught in her throat at his sudden proximity. "You need not try to be strong before me, Clara," Arthur murmured as he deftly wound the clean linen bandage around her hand. "I am your husband, at least in the name of this covenant. Protecting you is my duty." Clara felt her heart skip a beat. She looked at her neatly bandaged hand, sensing the lingering warmth from his fingers. This subtle warmth and quiet care from Arthur Sinclair slightly cracked the ice encasing her skeptical heart, sparking a faint hope within the cold winter castle. She looked up, and for a fleeting second, their eyes met in a silent exchange that spoke of more than just a legal agreement. Chapter 6. The Secret of the Rainy Night. Midpoint twist. The winter storm raged outside the large windows of Blackwood Manor, lashing cold rain against the gray stone walls of the ancient estate. The night was black as ink, with occasional bright flashes of lightning tearing through the dark sky, casting the shadows of barren oak branches upon the wooden floor. In the former study of the late Duchess Eleanor in the West Wing, where Clara spent her evening organizing old charity files and relief records, she accidentally discovered a secret drawer hidden deep within the bottom of an ancient oak cabinet carved with dragons. The old mahogany cabinet smelled of dried lavender, wood dust, and aged paper. When she gently pressed a hidden wooden spring behind a carved rose, the secret drawer sprang open. Lifting the old velvet lining, Clara gasped to find a dusty medical journal and several old letters written in the hurried black ink of the late family physician, Dr. Sterling. As she turned the pages yellowed by time under the flickering candlelight, Her blood ran cold, and her ears rang. The detailed records of the physician revealed that Arthur's late Duchess had not died of a sudden heart ailment, as high society believed. She had been poisoned with arsenic over a long period before her death. The doctor wrote, "I fear her grace did not waste away naturally. The vomiting and throat burning are identical to arsenic poisoning." When I warned Lady Beatrice, she immediately took charge of the kitchen and dismissed me the following morning. Duchess Eleanor passed away 3 days later. Nearby were confidential reports from Barnaby and Sons detectives in London sent to Arthur, confirming Beatrice purchased the poison from an apothecary in the East End. But the words that shocked and pained her most lay in a draft letter written in Arthur's own hand to his solicitor. "Bringing a new lady into Blackwood Manor and publicly handing her the management will be the perfect bait. Lady Beatrice will not tolerate seeing authority and the ledgers fall into another's hands. She will be forced to employ her old method of poisoning to protect Thomas. That is our sole opportunity to gather sufficient legal evidence to bring her before the Royal High Court for permanent imprisonment. I shall secretly monitor the new lady's food, but she must not know, so that her natural reactions will deceive Beatrice." Clara felt her chest tighten with fury, humiliation, and agonizing pain. Tears of betrayal threatened to spill from her lashes. It appeared that this entire marriage agreement, his public defense of her during the welcoming ball, was nothing but a clever trap of his design. She was merely a pawn, an innocent bait to lure the murderer before the law. He was as ruthless as her cousin, Viscount Harlow, willing to sacrifice her life for his own ends. The room seemed to close in on her, the shadows dancing mockingly on the walls. The warmth she had felt in the library, the tender care he had shown when binding her hand, all of it now felt like a cruel play. She had allowed herself to hope, to believe that there was a decent man behind that fierce scar, but she had been nothing but a tool in his family war. The thought of his ash-gray eyes looking at her, while knowing she was walking into a poisonous trap, made her stomach turn. Her fingers trembled so violently that she nearly dropped the paper, her breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. Unable to suppress her grief and anger, Clara took the files and ran through the dark corridors of the castle, the rain beating heavily against the windows. She pushed open the heavy wooden door leading to Arthur's study on the second floor. Arthur stood before a large military map of Yorkshire, his face showing signs of weariness and anxiety. When he saw Clara at the threshold, her hair slightly damp from the rain, her deep blue eyes filled with anger, hurt, and the file in her hands, he understood everything instantly. His face hardened, the long scar on his jaw twitching under the firelight. "Mr. Sinclair, so this is why you brought me here and gave me this title." Clara cast the documents and letters onto the writing desk, her voice trembling with emotion yet retaining the iron pride of a noblewoman. "You married me and elevated me to this position merely to serve as bait for Lady Beatrice's poison? You wished to use my life to resolve your family vendetta? Your protection, your gentle care with the ointment, all of it was falsehood and cold calculation." Arthur stood in silence under the flickering candlelight of the study. His face showed a genuine pain and regret that Clara had never witnessed in this cold-blooded cavalry general. He took a swift step forward, his voice low and raspy. "Clara, initially when I drafted that letter to Churchill before your arrival, it was indeed my plan. I was consumed by hatred and guilt for failing to save Eleanor. But I swear upon my honor, everything changed completely the moment you arrived." "Changed how? Because I have uncovered this secret." Clara laughed coldly, stepping back to maintain her distance. "No, I abandoned that entire bait plan 2 weeks ago." Arthur stepped forward, grasping her shoulders firmly yet gently. His ash-gray eyes looked deep into hers, filled with earnest sincerity from his heart. "When I saw you leap to shield Leo from the hot candlestick, when I witnessed your pride in the face of Beatrice's humiliation, I knew I could never allow you to be in danger. I cancelled the passive monitoring. I secretly stationed 4 of my finest Royal Cavalry Guards, led by Major Croft and Captain Miller, disguised as servants to protect you and Leo day and night. All your food and drink is inspected independently before being brought to your chambers. I would rather face the danger myself or let this title be disputed than allow you to suffer a single scratch." "Clara," he paused, his breathing ragged, his ash-gray eyes clouded. "I have fallen in love with you, Clara. It is no longer a transaction. If you wish, you may depart tomorrow with your full allowance and the southern estate, but I beg you to believe that my feelings for you were never false. You are the only one who has seen the true man behind this scar." Clara stood frozen, the anger and resentment in her heart softened before the Duke's passionate confession and the sincere protection in his eyes. She looked deep into his ash-gray eyes, seeking falsehood but finding only a painful truth. Though her trust had been fractured, Arthur's warm confession and silent protection prevented her from leaving him immediately. She gently brushed his hands off her shoulders, turning away to hide her confusion. "I require time to reflect, my lord, but for now we have a battle to wage in the upcoming London season." Chapter 7. Entering the London season. The social whirl of the London season commenced in April, bringing with it bustle, ceaseless intrigue, and the covert conflicts of the English elite. Peers from every county converged upon the capital to host grand balls, make morning calls, ride in Hyde Park, and vie for social influence within prestigious clubs. The London air was thick with the scent of coal smoke, carriage oil, and spring blossoms from Mayfair town houses. The arrival of Arthur Sinclair, Duke of Blackwood, and his new bride, the former governess Clara Harlow, at the family's Mayfair residence sent a veritable shockwave through the London ton. They were the main subject of conversation at every breakfast table, and the curiosity of the fashionable world was at a fever pitch. The gossip sheets and society columns repeatedly published accounts of their sudden betrothal. Rumors abounded that she was merely a maidservant duchess, a usurper of title, and laughed at her lack of dowry to stand beside the Duke. Many predicted that she would be denied vouchers to Almack's, the ultimate social rejection that could ruin a lady's standing forever. The grand debut ball at the residence of the Marchioness of Cowper was her first trial. The massive ballroom sparkled under crystal chandeliers, filled with the silks and brocades of hundreds of haughty aristocrats. As Clara entered, the vast room suddenly fell silent, and hundreds of mocking eyes, raised monocles, and silk fans covering faces turned toward the young woman. The air was heavy with the perfume of roses and the cold hostility of the crowd. Lady Jersey, who held absolute sway over Almack's and ruled as the uncrowned queen of the London ton, stood in the center of the hall alongside Lady Leven, Lady Cowper, and a circle of haughty ladies. She slightly raised her monocle to scan her from head to toe, speaking in a tone rich with irony, patronization, and disdain. "Oh, is this the new Duchess of Blackwood? Rumor has it that her grace is highly skilled in ledgers, domestic chores, and tutoring. How fortunate for Blackwood to possess a wife so versatile in manual labor. It is only a pity that London society demands noble qualities, pure lineage, and a fitting dowry rather than the common skills of a servant." Spiteful giggles and sarcastic whispers erupted along the ballroom corridors and behind silk fans. The hostility was clear, designed to crush the newcomer's spirit. Clara stood tall beside Arthur. She wore a simple yet flawlessly tailored dark blue satin gown that accentuated her elegant figure, slender shoulders, and noble neck. Her expression remained unchanged, her deep blue eyes flashing with confidence. She took a step forward, her voice clear and sharp with classic Regency wit, carrying across the room. "Lady Jersey, you speak with great truth. This society does indeed demand noble qualities, and I believe the noblest quality of an aristocrat is compassion, honesty, and the protection of the vulnerable, not standing in a ballroom counting another's dowry or whispering behind their backs. If Blackwood requires a duchess who can manage tens of thousands of acres, optimize budgets, and bring comfort to thousands of tenants, I am honored to fulfill that role, rather than merely dancing and gossiping about the lives of others. Nobility, I believe, resides in intellect and honor, not in the purse." Clara's sharp, firm, and proud retort left Lady Jersey entirely speechless, her face turning crimson with humiliation before the onlookers. The whispers changed to murmurs of surprise. Arthur Sinclair stepped forward to stand beside her, his large hand gently resting on her waist to assert his supreme public protection. He looked directly at Lady Jersey, his ash-gray eyes cold as a drawn sword. "My wife requires the approval of no one in this room to stand here. Her honor is the honor of Blackwood. Whoever questions her character, lineage, or right to be here challenges the cavalry blade and the honor of the House of Sinclair." The commanding presence of the most feared duke in England, and Clara's sharp intelligence, completely subdued the malicious mockery. The nobility began to look upon her with genuine awe. Clara did not merely withstand the storm of public opinion, she was steadily conquering the London ton through her own dignity and capability. Chapter 8. The snare from the ashes. Though they struggled to maintain a noble facade at their London townhouse, Lady Beatrice and Lord Thomas were filled with resentment and desperation. The walls were covered in soot, the air thick with cheap liquor and hearth smoke. Beholding Clara shining brilliantly as Duchess and closely guarded by Arthur during the London season, they knew their prospects of inheriting Blackwood were closing forever if Leo regained his voice and Arthur sired a new heir. Resolving to risk everything, Beatrice conspired with Clara's greedy uncle, Viscount Harlow. He remained bitter over losing the large debt, and the chance to sell Clara to the brutal old merchant, Kenneth Thorne. In a dim corner of a squalid tavern near London Bridge, they devised a sinister trap to destroy both Clara and Leo in a single night. Harlow wished to seize Clara to force her to sign a confession of theft, while Beatrice prepared a vial of belladonna mixed with lead acetate, purchased from a rogue apothecary in Whitechapel, aiming to permanently ruin Leo's vocal cords and mind. The dark tavern smelled of stale ale and damp rot, a fireplace smoke thick in the air, a fitting place for their desperate malice. They knew that the House of Blackwood would host a grand charity garden party at the Sinclair suburban estate in Richmond to raise funds for poor children. This was a public event attended by numerous nobles and children playing on the lawns, where security would be lax due to the large crowd and the chaos of outdoor activities. Their objective was to abduct Leo during the party, force him to drink the poison to demonstrate to the crowd that he was congenitally insane, and frame Clara for negligence to strip Arthur of custody before Parliament. On the day of the garden party, the grounds of the Richmond villa were vibrant with spring blossoms and elegant cream tents. Clara held Leo's hand tightly, constantly scanning her surroundings with high vigilance. Leo appeared delighted, pointing at a carriage and signing to Clara, "Mother, look at the white horse," his vocabulary of signs growing richer by the day. Yet in the midst of the party, a young maid named Sarah ran up in a panic. Sarah had been blackmailed by Beatrice, who held the debt note of Sarah's sister. Sarah wept as she informed Clara that there was an urgent financial document from the solicitor, Henry Churchill, requiring her immediate signature in the library to submit to Parliament on time. Seeing the maid's urgency, Clara believed her, but carefully instructed her 2 cavalry guards, Major Croft and Captain Miller, to stand close watch over Leo by the wooden swing before she quickly entered the villa. Just as Clara stepped into the dim library room, the heavy wooden door behind her slammed shut and was locked from the outside. The click of the key turning made her blood run cold. She turned to pound on the door, but it was in vain. The room was silent, and the shadows from the tall bookshelves stretched across the floor. From the shadows of the towering mahogany bookshelves, Lord Thomas emerged, holding a cloth soaked in chloroform, his face revealing base madness and murderous intent. He reeked of strong spirits. "Nowhere left to run, maidservant Duchess," Thomas sneered, lunging toward her. "Today Arthur's son will become a mad cripple, and you will be cast into Newgate prison for the manslaughter of the heir. Your uncle is waiting outside to claim his share." Clara backed away, maintaining absolute composure. She did not scream, knowing the room was soundproofed, and a cry would only agitate Thomas. Her hand groped along the tea table nearby, gripping a heavy crystal vase, a royal gift to Arthur's grandfather. Her eyes flashed with fierce determination, and the memory of Arthur's promise of protection. "Do not dare touch my son, Thomas." As Thomas lunged to overpower her, Clara swiftly stepped aside and struck his temple with the crystal vase, using all her might. The vase shattered, cutting Thomas's face, and he groaned before collapsing unconscious onto the Persian carpet. Panting, Clara searched his pockets for the keys, unlocked the library door, and ran outside to summon the guards to protect Leo. Her breath was short, but her mind was remarkably clear. Chapter 9. The Reversal at Blackwood Hall. The great hall of Blackwood Hall was steeped in a suffocating and intensely tense atmosphere for the estate hearing. The ancient centuries-old grey stone walls were illuminated by the flickering candlelight from large bronze sconces, casting long shadows across the anxious and curious faces gathered within. Lady Beatrice Sinclair had assembled the family lawyers, led by Solicitor Henry Churchill, the family doctor, and the most influential patronesses of Yorkshire. Her objective was to employ social pressure to officially declare the young heir, Leo Sinclair, congenitally insane, thereby stripping him of his lawful inheritance and transferring the estate to Lord Thomas. Following their failed abduction plot in Richmond and Thomas being rendered unconscious by Clara with the crystal vase, Beatrice and her son had fled back to Yorkshire in utter panic. Yet rather than surrender, Beatrice resolved to play a desperate final hand. Lord Thomas stood beside his mother, his face still swathed in blood-stained bandages and heavily bruised from Clara's blow, his eyes filled with raw malice and desperation. Lady Beatrice stood at the center of the hall, her thin, shrill voice echoing imperiously. "My ladies and esteemed guests, I have convened this hearing to bring a grievous truth to light. Leo Sinclair is entirely mute and mentally incompetent. The child lacks the capacity to inherit the title of Duke of Blackwood. Furthermore, Duke Arthur Sinclair has been deceived by a thieving governess, Clara Harlow, who has stolen her calling card and now abuses the child to seize the family fortune." Viscount Harlow, Clara's rapacious uncle, stepped forward to echo her claims with false gravity. "Indeed, my lords and ladies, I stand as witness that Clara Harlow stole my family's calling card to escape her debts and seduce the Duke. She is nothing more than a common thief." A wave of uneasy murmurs rippled through the Yorkshire patronesses. They exchanged looks of concern and began to cast doubtful glances regarding the honor of the House of Sinclair. Just as the tension reached its zenith, the heavy iron chains of the main gates rattled, and the massive oak doors of Blackwood Hall's great hall swung wide. Duke Arthur Sinclair strode in, and by his side walked Clara Harlow. She wore an elegantly tailored dark blue silk gown, her hair swept up to showcase the glittering diamond tiara of the House of Blackwood, exuding the proud poise of a true duchess. Between them walked young Leo Sinclair, dressed in a small dark blue noble suit, his cheeks flushed with health, holding Clara's hand with absolute trust. Arthur's cavalry guards, led by Major Croft, quickly positioned themselves around the hall, securing all exits. Arthur Sinclair stepped into the center of the hall, his presence cold as ice. He looked at Beatrice and Thomas with ash-gray eyes of battle-hardened ruthlessness. "Do you dare hold a hearing regarding my son's inheritance within my own estate?" His voice was low yet resonant with immense authority, plunging the entire room into absolute silence. Solicitor Henry Churchill stepped forward, bowing to the Duke before addressing the guests clearly. "My ladies and gentlemen, this is the legal marriage settlement valued at £150,000, proving Clara Harlow is the lawful Duchess of Blackwood. All accusations of theft of identity are entirely slanderous falsehoods aimed at defaming her grace." The long-serving family doctor of the castle then stepped forward, holding an old medical journal and toxicological reports. "And this is my official medical journal and the reports of the deceased apothecaries. These documents prove that Lady Beatrice Sinclair systematically poisoned the late Duchess Eleanor and secretly administered belladonna mixed with lead acetate to destroy the vocal cords of the heir, Leo Sinclair, over the past 2 years. This was done to fabricate the illusion of congenital muteness to clear the path of inheritance for Lord Thomas." The entire hall stood frozen in shock, and gasps of horror erupted from the Yorkshire ladies. Beatrice trembled and recoiled, her face turning pale as a corpse as she shrieked hysterically, "No, it is a fabrication. That child is a mute idiot. He has never spoken a word. He cannot speak at all." Amidst the absolute silence of the great hall, young Leo Sinclair let go of Clara's hand and bravely took a step forward. He raised his head high, his large black eyes staring directly into Beatrice's cruel face. First, the boy used his small hands to swiftly perform sign language, expressing his love for Clara and denouncing Beatrice's cruelty. Then, to the utter astonishment of the assembly, Leo spoke in a clear, ringing voice, "She kept me safe." The 5-year-old child's clear words echoed through the hall like a thunderbolt. The Yorkshire patronesses gasped in disbelief, their outrage instantly turning upon Beatrice and Thomas. The truth was laid bare. The child was neither insane nor mute by nature. It was Beatrice's cruelty that had harmed him, and Clara was the one who had saved his life. Arthur stepped forward, standing by Clara, placing his hand upon her shoulder as he declared before the assembly, "From this day forth, she is the Duchess of Blackwood. Whosoever dares question her honor declares war upon Arthur Sinclair." Arthur coldly ordered Major Croft and the butler, Benson, expel Beatrice and Thomas from the Blackwood estate immediately. Deliver them along with the evidence of poisoning to the local constables to face justice. The guards immediately seized Lady Beatrice and Lord Thomas, dragging the disgraced conspirators out of the castle amidst their desperate, humiliated shrieks. Viscount Harlow was likewise escorted away by the cavalry to face charges of financial fraud. The supreme reversal was complete, restoring honor and peace to the halls of Blackwood. Chapter 10. The dawn of Blackwood. Lady Beatrice and Lord Thomas were detained by local constables and subsequently sentenced by the Yorkshire court to life imprisonment for the attempted murder of the late Duchess Eleanor, the attempted murder of the male heir Leo Sinclair, and conspiracy to swindle. Viscount Harlow's ill-gotten assets were confiscated, his title was stripped, and he was banished permanently from polite society. The villains paid a heavy price, losing all honor, status, and wealth. As for Clara, the burden of her father's debt was finally lifted, and the true honor of the House of Harlow was restored. Upon the wild moors of Yorkshire at Blackwood Manor, the snow ceased entirely, making way for warm spring sunshine that melted the thick ice on the rolling hills. The ancient castle lost its gloomy, cold air. It was swept clean, windows were flung open to receive the spring breeze, and it filled with the laughter of loyal servants. The estate gardens began to bloom with daffodils and roses. Arthur and Clara stood on the stone balcony of the master suite, looking down at the courtyard where young Leo played merrily with solicitor Henry and the butler, Benson, chasing a small puppy. Leo had fully recovered his health and spirits, his laughter and clear voice echoing throughout the garden. Beholding the two on the balcony, Leo ran up the stone steps, embracing Clara's gown, and whispered, "Mother, come down and play in the garden with me. The flowers are so beautiful." Clara smiled, bending down to hug the boy and kissing his forehead. "I shall join you shortly, my darling. Run along and play." Arthur turned to look at Clara as Leo ran down to the garden. He gently took her hand, now healed of the burn, his ash-gray eyes no longer bearing the ruthlessness of battle, but filled with tenderness and deep affection. "Clara, our 2-year agreement, do you wish to fulfill it to the end, to claim the southern estate and depart?" Clara smiled, a smile as radiant as a spring rose in Yorkshire. She rested her head against his broad chest, feeling the steady heartbeat of the man who had protected her throughout the journey. "I believe I have found the finest estate of my life here, Arthur. I shall go nowhere, our agreement has ended, but this marriage is real. I love you, my scarred Duke." Arthur leaned down, pressing a tender kiss upon her lips, sealing a true love born from the ashes of doubt and hatred. A few weeks later, at Almack's Club, the most prestigious venue of the London season. As the grand doors opened, Arthur Sinclair, Duke of Blackwood, stepped in alongside Clara, Duchess of Blackwood. The entire London ton, including the haughty Lady Jersey, rose as one, bowing respectfully to welcome the most powerful couple in England. A radiant, warm dawn had finally returned to the domain of Blackwood Manor.